So of all of the writings of Baha'u'llah that we have access to, which is only about 5% of the total, of around 6 million words, is the latest fairly recent estimate of how much Baha'u'llah revealed, which is way more than 100 volumes. Well, depending on how you define volume. We've picked this very slim, unassuming book to take a sort of a deeper dive into. The idea, and well, my conviction being that Baha'u'llah is really encapsulated in one very short tablet of just 14 or so paragraphs, and a second tablet that was, that we'll talk about the circumstances, kind of reiterates and expands upon the themes in the first tablet. Baha'u'llah has really encapsulated something of the essence of the spiritual revolution that he's brought, and something of the way in which Baha'u'llah has helped or sparked a redefinition in the conception of religion, which is a very big claim, and will, I hope, justify it as we get into the text. The tablet itself was.
You're asking what things it is.
Oh, okay.
And here's
Nah.
Oh, is this the missing pages? So yeah, our printed versions have a few missing pages, so this deficit is now rectified.
I apologize on behalf of Staples and my husband. He's been in the Thank you. Thank you.
The tablet that we're looking at was revealed in the, we don't have an exact date for it, but it was revealed in the mid-1870s. But it references something that happened much earlier, which is, I think, relevant to the context of the tablet. Baha'u'llah, during the period of his exile in Baghdad, in the mid-1850s, thank you, and into the early 1860s, and prior to his declaration, had a number of contacts, friends, people that he hung out with in the coffee houses of Baghdad, to sort of put it slightly irreverently. And one of these friends of Baha'u'llah was a Zoroastrian by the name of Manachi Sahib, who was actually a Parsi of Indian origin, and I'm just reiterating what's in the introduction to the volume, and who was quite well known among the Zoroastrian community as someone of means, who was appointed as kind of an ambassador to the Zoroastrian community of Persia, which at the time was experiencing some difficulties in relationship with the government. And Manachi Sahib was sort of there in the area, doing work on behalf of his community. And at some point, he was in Baghdad and met Baha'u'llah. So the two knew each other. But Manachi Sahib, you can sort of imagine from Manachi Sahib's perspective, he knew Baha'u'llah not as a prophet, but as, certainly a wise man, leader of the Babi community, not even necessarily the nominal leader of the Babi community. Because Mirza Yahya was the nominal leader of the Babi community, and they had a certain friendly relationship, and you can imagine what might have gone through Manachi Sahib's head, years later when he hears that this friend of his is now declared himself to be a prophet. And you can imagine Maharaji Sahib sort of writing to Baha'u'llah, and we don't, and fortunately we have a list of, because Baha'u'llah has reproduced it in the second tablet. We know, the meat of the letter that Maharaji Sahib wrote to Baha'u'llah. We don't have the full text of it, but we can imagine him saying something like, "Well, now that you're a prophet, can you explain to me the following thing?" And so Maharaji threw at Baha'u'llah sort of all that he had, sort of, what about this and what about that, and explain this metaphysical conundrum, and and how did the universe really come into being, and what about, and so we have this list of questions, and probably worthwhile passing it out. And so what I have on, this is a two-sided sheet, but what I have on the side that says the questions of Maharaji Sahib is extracted simply from the, and paraphrased from the contents of this second tablet. Because Baha'u'llah responded to this list of, as we see, 10 questions with a very short, as we said, tablet of just a few paragraphs. It's actually 19 paragraphs. And Baha'u'llah doesn't directly reference any of the questions. Not in a way that you kind of guess, well, what question is he answering in which part of this original tablet, but it's kind of a general answer. Not only is it a general answer, but it's kind of like all of the 10 questions, or at least 9 of the 10, were answered in one sentence, in one paragraph. And Maharaji Sahib wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer, and so he wrote back to Baha'u'llah. And this time he wrote, because Maharaji Sahib had a secretary at the time, a sort of personal secretary, who happened to be Mirza Abul Fazl, the great Baha'i scholar, doing some, doing a little bit of, he had a side gig, I guess, from his Baha'i scholarship, helping Maharaji Sahib with his correspondence. And of course, Baha'u'llah had his secretary, his amanuensis, Mirza Agha. And so the second tablet, when Maharaji Sahib sort of indicates to Baha'u'llah that he wants a fuller answer, was done sort of at two removes. It was Maharaji Sahib's secretary writing to Baha'u'llah's secretary and getting a response. So kind of my people talking to your people kind of a thing. And in that context, it was possibly slightly more direct. And slightly less delicate, sort of say, well, you're mistaken about this point, which you really couldn't have done in the sort of context of the sort of the polite standard of the time. And Baha'u'llah indicates actually at the beginning of the second tablet that I didn't really go into all the details because it wouldn't have been polite. And so in the second tablet, which is much longer and which we're very glad, I think, we should be very grateful to Maharaji Sahib that he didn't really get it. Because if he hadn't come back to Baha'u'llah and said, please explain further, we wouldn't have had this entire text of all the questions that were asked. And as it turns out, I think we will get a lot of insight knowing the questions that we wouldn't have had if we only had the answer. So, and Baha'u'llah adds actually quite a bit in the second tablet that wasn't there in the first that we'll be able to get into. Yeah.
If you permit me, can I add something?
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the very first times we studied this book together with a few friends. Somebody had made the comment for how stupid that we wouldn't understand what Baha'u'llah was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And Baha'u'llah has the same style pretty much all throughout the writings. That's how I see his pattern, that he will start something and in the within very first couple of sentences, his whole claim is set. And then he goes on to talking about it, and you're like, oh, okay, this is what it means. And so because of that comment, since then, what I do is that we will do I extract the questions separate, but we do the tablet, the first one that was just done like that. And I give them the question, and I say, let's study this tablet, you tell me how Baha'u'llah is answering that.
Mhm.
Most of the Baha'is cannot figure it out until you come to the elaborate one.
Mhm.
So it's a fun thing.
Yeah, we might go back, and I've done that exercise in the first tablet too, try to say, paragraph by paragraph, what question is he answering? And so I have sort of my answers written in the margins, but it's just guesswork. And maybe when we get to the end of the second tablet, we might quickly go back to the first and say, now, where do we think he was answering these 10 questions? Because all 10 questions are answered. As Baha'u'llah himself says, they're really all summed up in, as we'll see, the fourth paragraph of the first tablet. But one thing I want us to really appreciate in what Baha'u'llah is doing, not just in this tablet, but in his entire revelation, is he's really accomplishing the impossible. And what is the impossible? He's trying to redefine the concept of religious belief. He's trying to take it from its let's say, its primitive beginning, suitable to the childhood of the human race, and to redefine it for the maturity of the human race. We know that one way of looking at the big picture of where the Baha'i faith is situated in the history of civilization is our conception of it is that this is the moment of the maturation of the human race. Something that only comes once. Afterwards, things can be fundamentally different because, just as in the case of an individual that reaches maturity, you just think differently about things. You're able to live in a way that you can't as a child. And Baha'u'llah is speaking to that future state of humanity. But at the same time, he's very practical and pragmatic. Meaning he understands the limitations of the people he's speaking to at the same time. So he has to speak in a way that simultaneously will resonate with people who are expecting and need the sort of old-time way of thinking about things and looking at things. And he also needs to speak to that future state of humanity and the new language and the new conceptual framework behind it. How does he do that? He uses words with double meanings. He says things. He himself talks about the various voices that he uses. He himself talks about there being multiple meanings hidden behind the words. And I think part of that is, and part of really the genius of a prophet over the genius of a philosopher or a scientist. A philosopher or a scientist may be saying things of great depth and profundity, but their audience is always a single audience. They're saying there's one layer, and they have a certain idea they want to get across. What the prophets are doing, and they do this by means of parables. Jesus did it with parables, and Baha'u'llah also does it in his own way. The prophets have this extra task of they're speaking to multiple audiences, and so their words have to have multiple meanings. And that's one thing to keep in mind as we read Baha'u'llah, because sometimes it sounds like he's talking in very traditional theological terms that sounds just like it's coming out of the Quran, or it sounds just like it's coming out of the Bible. And why would he say things in these terms if he's redefining religion in a radical way? And I think the answer has to do with the fact that his audience has to be taken into account, and the practical exigencies of the day, as we'll see that he gets into. So getting to the tablet itself, we'll see if time allows us, as I hope it will, but it would be quite long even to read just the entirety of these first two tablets, let alone the last three. but we'll see what we have time for as we go along. Certainly the entirety of the first tablet, and at least big chunks of the second tablet we'll sort of read through together over the course of the day and tomorrow morning. But we can begin with this beautiful introduction. We might call it an exordium, which has certain resonance with another sacred book we may be familiar with. He opens, "In the name of the one true God, praise be to the all-perceiving, the ever-abiding Lord, who from a dewdrop out of the ocean of his grace hath reared the firmament of existence, adorned it with the stars of knowledge, and admitted man into the lofty court of insight and understanding." This dewdrop, which is the primal word of God, is at times called the water of life, inasmuch as it quickeneth with the waters of knowledge them that have perished in the wilderness of ignorance. Again, it is called the primal light, a light born of the sun of divine knowledge, through whose effulgence the first stirrings of existence were made plain and manifest. Such manifestations are the expressions of the grace of him who is the peerless, the all-wise. He it is who knoweth and bestoweth all. He it is who transcendeth all that hath been said or heard. His knowledge will remain forever above the grasp of human vision and understanding, and beyond the reach of human words and deeds. To the truth of this utterance, existence itself and all that hath appeared therefrom bear eloquent testimony. Just a brief note on the language of this. In the original Persian, this entire tablet is really just exquisite, and it's written in a different style than Baha'u'llah has used in almost all of his other tablets. It's written in Persian, but it's written in pure Persian, and I think this is partly as to do honor to the questioner, because Maharishi Sahib, as a Zoroastrian, as a sort of proponent of ancient Persian culture, as we'll see, had kind of a thing for Persian, and actually and had suggested that Baha'u'llah write this in pure Persian, as opposed to the Persian of the day, which had a great admixture of Arabic into it, owing to the historical fact of the conquering of the ancient Persian Empire by Islam early into the dispensation of Islam, and then the introduction of a lot of Arabic into Persian. And most of Baha'u'llah's Persian, as we see from his prayers and tablets, has admixed into it a lot of Arabic. I mean, I can't say the exact percentage, but it's about half. You know, if you look at the words that Baha'u'llah uses in Persian, a high percentage of them have Arabic derivatives, and that was just the language of the day. But Baha'u'llah in this tablet has sort of pulled out all the Arabic, and this tablet, as well as the last three in the volume, shorter ones, are all written in this pure Persian style. There may be a few others in the entirety of the 20,000 tablets that Baha'u'llah rewrote, but there aren't very many. So that's a special aspect of this that simply is not going to come through in the English, and it's just can't really be appreciated by the English readers. Now, Baha'u'llah is opening this with perhaps a nod to. Can someone guess what does this remind you of, this opening? Any other sacred work? Of not even a Baha'i sacred work, but from an earlier time. The opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. There's the opening paragraph of the Gospel of John also begins with this exordium on the Word, in similar terms, also describing the Word as that which is in some way the origin of things. A word which itself is derivative of a higher reality, but which forms in some way the the ground of existence. And for that, I have actually a few other quotations to share, because it's such a pervasive, maybe take one and pass it on, it's such a pervasive theme in Baha'u'llah's writings. Actually, let me grab one of those. That it bears mentioning. For Baha'u'llah, this concept of the word as something which is generated in a cosmic sense, not just generated in the human sense, that words are the source of human ideas, and in that sense are creative and generative. But the concept of word being a generative element in creation is one of, I think, is one of many examples that we were talking about yesterday, about how sort of what's cosmic, physical, what goes back to, the physical universe connects to the spiritual universe. That there's almost like infinite gradation between them. Our idea that there's two separate kinds of stuff is a bit undermined by, in many places in the Baha'i writings, and one of which is this concept of word having not just a human significance, but having this cosmic significance. Somehow the word is the generator of creation. Well, how can that be when there weren't beings to speak words, way back when? And the idea is, it's really a deep idea in itself, could be the subject of, just an hour-long or hours-long workshop. The idea is that this generating word, that word, that dewdrop, Baha'u'llah says, of existence, is a word of command. We know what that word is. It's the B and the E being joined and knit together from the long obligatory prayer and from other works. In Arabic, it's an imperative kon, kaf and nun. It's coincidentally and fortunately also comprised of two letters in the Arabic. There's no guarantee that would be the case. It's sort of an accident of translation. It's not always the case in all the languages into which Baha'u'llah's writings are translated that this kaf and nun of the commanding word is translated into an imperative of two letters. Sometimes it's three letters in the languages into which it's translated, which obscures it a bit, because it's important that it's two letters and not three and not four, because this commanding word, the kaf and the nun, is representative of of substance and form. It's representative also of the male and female principle. It's representative of the of active and passive. The ancient Greek theory of the four elements, of everything being comprised of air, earth, fire, and water. In that ancient theory, two of those elements are the active agents, and two of those elements are the recipient agents. So there is a long history of cosmological theories, and also a long history, theologically, of taking this idea of word, of generative word, and breaking it into two complementary principles. Baha'u'llah also in his Tablet of Wisdom refers to the universe coming to being through the interaction between the active force and its recipient. And then Baha'u'llah says these two are the same, yet they are different. And one could say the same about the male and female principle, which is, in a way, the male and female principle is not necessarily just an accident of our biological evolution, but reflects something of greater cosmic significance. It reflects, in its own way, the existence of complementary pairs throughout creation. And the complementary pairing of things is a feature and not a bug. It somehow enables, let's say, the release of potentialities through their joining and uniting across, both in terms of words coming together, in terms of biologically, and also in terms of more cosmically. So I refer to this idea of the generative word as also comprising the opening of the book of John in the Bible, and this is the actual quotation from this extra sheet. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. And a few sentences down, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So there's a strange sort of mystical identity of the Word with God, but at the same time a separation. So the very idea of identity and separation is relative, relative to one's perspective. Abdu'l-Baha, in one of his talks in America, says, this statement is brief but replete with the greatest meanings. Its applications are illimitable and beyond the power of books or words to contain and express. And I think one of those meanings has to do with this idea of the Word comprising these two pillars of the B and the E. So a couple of other passages elsewhere in Baha'u'llah's writings, he also talks about this primordial and cosmic significance of the Word. One of them is in Prayers and Meditations. He says, I testify that no sooner had the first word proceeded through the potency of thy will and purpose out of his mouth, and the first call gone forth from his lips, then the whole creation was revolutionized, and all that are in the heavens and all that are on earth were stirred to the depths. Through that word, the realities of all created things were shaken, were divided, separated, scattered, combined, and reunited, disclosing in both the contingent world and the heavenly kingdom entities of a new creation, revealing in the unseen realms the signs and tokens of thy unity and oneness. Through that call thou didst announce unto all thy servants the advent of thy most great revelation and the appearance of thy most perfect cause. I love that imagery of things being divided and scattered and reunited through this.
That sounds like a Big Bang, doesn't it?
It kind of does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Sounds like me in the kitchen.
Making a sound.
So the next, this next passage about the Word is from Baha'u'llah's Tablet of Wisdom, and I reference part of it, and here's the entire context. That which hath been in existence had existed before, but not in the form thou seest today. The world of existence came into being through the heat generated from the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient. These two are the same, yet they are different. Thus doth the great announcement inform thee about this glorious structure, such as communicate the generating influence, and such as receive its impact, are indeed created through the irresistible Word of God, which is the cause of the entire creation, while all else beside his words are but the creatures and the effects thereof. Verily thy Lord is the expounder of the all-wise. Know thou moreover that the Word of God, exalted be his glory, is higher and far superior to that which the senses can perceive, for it is sanctified from any property or substance. It transcendeth the limitations of known elements and is exalted above the essential and recognized substances. It became manifest without any syllable or sound, and is none but the command of God, which pervadeth all created things. It hath never been withheld from the world of being. It is God's all-pervasive grace, from which all grace doth emanate. It is an entity far removed above all that hath been and shall be. There's a lot to unpack from here. Yeah.
I was going to say that the first sentence of that last paragraph kind of wraps back to, in the beginning was the Word, and
Yes.
in the Greek, the logos, which isn't even a verbal thing, it's like the essence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so here he's coming back to that again. It
Yes.
sort of bounces back and forth between Word as something that's spoken, and then just that, like you were talking about last night, that pervasive essence, right? It's
Yes.
everywhere.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up logos, because I think it's exactly that logos, which is the Greek word in the Gospel of John. But even prior to the Gospel of John, it was a key word in Greek philosophy from centuries before. And it implies also not just word, but it also implies the concept of an ordering principle. And that's precisely the sense in which Baha'u'llah is using it. So, and this is also connected, this reference to this word being the command, which emanates and pervades. This idea of emanation and this idea of the word pervading. I also just wanted to briefly note, because this is also a theme you'll find running through the Baha'i writings, which has its origins again in ancient Greek philosophy. The idea of emanation is one that traditionally attributed to Plotinus, who was a follower of Plato during the Roman Empire around 200 or 300 AD, and Plotinus was known for proposing the idea that creation can be thought of not as a one-time act, which there's a creation event, and then you have stuff that's essentially passive and just kind of sitting there that having been created, and now it's just in its essence has no activity to it. Instead, proposed that creation can be seen as the rays, like the rays of the sun, but crudely like the rays of the sun, because the thing that the universe is an emanation from is, even in Plotinus's theology or philosophy, itself essentially beyond even oneness and beyond attributes and beyond being really grasped. But the idea is that even matter in its stable, seemingly inert matter, ultimately has a fundamental reality which is active and which is in motion. That's one consequence of this idea of things being an emanation. Another consequence of it is that if you want to imagine that this emanation is the result of a will, in Baha'i terms we would call it the primal will of God, and to add to that will is the will to be known, which connects to the theme from last night, the idea of the whole point of everything is consciousness, to completing the circle, the circle of consciousness, of the thing that emanates consciousness. That consciousness then reflects upon its origin. Then the concept of emanation, of consciousness, of will, of the commanding word, of love, it all wraps into this neat idea of the circle of existence, which is comprised of an emanating arc, as Abdu'l-Baha describes it in Some Answered Questions, an arc of descent, which is the emanation of everything in the various degrees of existence that we see, and a returning arc, and that returning arc is the arc of what we call spiritual progress. But all along both halves of that arc, which comprise this circle of existence, it all describes this evolution of consciousness from the most rudimentary forms in the early universe of just matter coming together and responding to the forces that affect it, to the higher forms of consciousness as it has evolved on this planet. Doubtless has evolved in other ways on other planets, because that's the whole purpose of creation. So one imagines that consciousness has evolved in many places. But that consciousness ultimately reaches its highest point when it reunites with its source. So the rays of that invisible sun are different from the rays of our sun, in that they don't just spread out into space infinitely, but eventually they curve back in and return to the source. you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for me personally, it works the same way for individual as soon as you create a relationship with the Word. And like be and it is. And it's finding Him for example, for myself, from my experience, and to the outside world, those who knew me before and those who see me now, if they didn't see me since I've met Him, to them I am a different person altogether, even though my features are same and my body is same, but they don't recognize me. And when I myself look at those a day before and a day after, I don't recognize myself, even though I know that that was me. And this change of making you into something else is just amazing. The effect of that command and effect of that receiving and what comes into being. It's just, yeah.
One last point on this before we go back to the tablet. And this doesn't come through in the translation. When Baha'u'llah says, such as communicate the generating influence and such as receive its impact are indeed created through the irresistible Word of God. The Arabic behind this is the fa'ilain and the munfa'ilain. It's the dual form. So it's slightly an imprecise translation, but literally Baha'u'llah is saying the twin agents and the twin patients are indeed created through the irresistible Word of God. And it's important to mention that because it's another point of connection between what Baha'u'llah is saying and sort of ancient cosmologies, which it's really continuous with. The ancient cosmology is the theory of the four elements, where you have the air and fire and earth and four air, fire and water and air and earth as being paired off as sort of active and recipient elements. Baha'u'llah is really referencing these twin elements, active and passive. Not that we should turn this into a theory of physics, but there are spiritual resonances that could be drawn out of it, and it's just neat to see how it all sort of connects. It's such an amazing interconnecting web of ideas that does produce a coherent picture. So coming back then to the
Steve,
yes.
raise a hand.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
question. All right. Or I had this other, connection with the beginning of Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
which then talks about the whole water portion of that with the elements.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And then later on, it kind of says that let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And then God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. A lot of water and firmament going on here.
Yes. Yes.
But I just find that the element of water being in the primal, beginning of things.
Yes. So listen to this. I'm glad you mentioned that because it gives me an opportunity to read. This is a provisional translation from a tablet of Baha'u'llah's, which, for those who have read Plato's Timaeus, it sounds a bit, it also sounds, has some resonances with Plato's Timaeus. Praise be to God who created the water from his manifest utterance in the kingdom of eternity. Then he gazed upon it, and lo, it trembled within itself, and a part of it became congealed. Thus the dusty earth appeared by his established decree in the world of origination. When these two elements became separated and distinguished from each other, the tongue of grandeur produced another word, and this water, generated by the will of the most manifest in the world of contingency, moved in that same realm of contingency upon the earth, generated by the purpose of the All-Merciful. He's talking about will and purpose, as Mashiach and Erade are also another way of identifying the be and me. Those are the two sort of primal pillars. By the interaction of these two, a subtle, spiritual, luminous heat ascended by virtue of its potency to the uppermost degree in order to attain the station of which its all-glorious Lord speaketh. When it reached the utmost level, it stopped at that loftiest station, which indicates the formation of the highest sphere. Then the water became partially mixed with the earth, and from them ascended another heat, which on account of its weakness did not attain to the level of the first. It stopped at another station, which indicates the second sphere. In like manner, a heat ascended from these two, one time after another, until all the stations, which mean the spheres, became completed. Then the tongue of grandeur produced another word, which caused the stations and spheres to revolve. From the force of the rotation, a light shone forth and encompassed the face of heaven. Then brilliant stars and shining orbs appeared. When the majesty of his name, the self-subsisting, encompassed them from all directions, each one of the two became spherical, as is seen in the case of the sun and the moon. Exalted be the wise and almighty Creator, who made his exalted word to be the origin of the creation of the higher and lower worlds, the four elements, and the exalted originated natures.
Wow.
It's
So
like,
this is where?
Wow.
this is a tablet of Baha'u'llah. It's published in two places in the original, in the Iranian National Baha'i Archives collection, volume 17, pages 79 to 80, and that's available online. For those who seek, they shall find. And it's also published in a well-known Persian magazine called Andali, volume 5, number 19, page 32. So it's a...
The more
That's taking, and God created the heavens and the earth to a whole new level.
A whole new level. And it's mixing in, it's mixing in a bunch of things. The idea of a sort of successive emanation and the creation, he's talking about the creation of the celestial spheres, this ancient cosmological idea of the universe being comprised of concentric spheres. It has this idea of the, and there's another tablet of Baha'u'llah where, now that we're on the topic.
Now, the citations that you gave us a minute ago, those are the original Farsi, not the
Yes.
original translation.
Right, the original translations are unpublished. And so these are, I'm just giving the original citations. So in another place, and this is referencing briefly what we talked about yesterday, that Baha'u'llah, there's some tablets where he describes the alchemical process. So this is one of the, in one of those tablets he says, and now he's really echoing Plato's Timaeus. He says, know then that God, praised and glorified be He, took a line, split it lengthwise into two, rotated the one about the other, and so made from them the universe. The line, however, a line,
Say that again.
split it lengthwise into two, I'm not sure what that means, rotated the one about the other, and so made from them the universe. The line, however, formeth only from the point when you move it. Conceive ye then our meaning.
Got that?
Got that?
Yeah, you know what I'm thinking?
And that's in Ma'adeh Asamani, volume 1, page 55. This was also published in English in an article, a fantastic article by Kevin Brown. Oh, you know Kevin Brown. In the Journal of Baha'i Studies, volume 2, number 3. He wrote an article called The Baha'i Perspective on the Origin of Creation. And he has a few, on the origin of matter, thank you. And he has a few provisional translations in here, and this is one of them. That's also where I learned about the fact that there is a whole body of tablets by Baha'u'llah that reference the alchemical process.
You said it was volume 2.
Volume 2, number 3. They may all be available online. I'm not sure if the Association of Baha'i Studies has put all the back issues online. So if they have, you can go to that. And if you're interested in these ideas, if they kind of sort of get the neurons firing, I highly recommend looking at Kevin Brown's article, because this article covers ground that has never since been covered, as far as I'm aware, in Baha'i scholarship. And Kevin Brown followed this article up by a second article called Apollonius of Tyana. In I think it's called that. or it has Apollonius of Tyana, who was a, it's a fascinating detour, but we have to get back to the tablet. He was also a famous, I think, ancient Greek, who was thought to have been the same as the disciple of Hermes, Valinus, the disciple of Hermes, is thought to have been Apollonius of Tyana, because the Polonius, if you turn the P into a B, you might get Valinus out of it. Valinus was the author of a book called the Kitabe Sorel Chadika, or the book of the secrets of creation, which Baha'u'llah quotes from in the Tablet of Wisdom, in the Law Hikmat, and Valinus was supposedly the recipient of the secret of alchemy from the hand of Hermes, who Baha'u'llah identifies again in the Tablet of Wisdom as being the origin of all philosophy.
And
So-
according to the Quran, Hermes is a prophet.
According to the Quran, Hermes is a prophet, and there's a footnote on Hermes in Tablets of Baha'u'llah revealed after the Kitabi Akdas that quotes another Tablet of Baha'u'llah referencing Hermes. He might have even identified him
Allah
as a
says
prophet.
philosophy starts from him.
He says philosophy starts from here. I can't remember if he identified him as a prophet or not, but anyway, you can see this is. The rabbit hole goes really deep from this point, but we're going to have to sort of back out of it and get to paragraph 2.
And Stephen, I
Yeah.
quickly want to mention, I'm so happy you had said these few things, that being a student of philosophy and religion, Baha'u'llah amazes me every day. When he touches on these topics that have been said 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, if one has actually studied those, you will notice where he tweaks them, where he corrects them, and where he upholds them. And it's amazing because some of those tweakings that there was contentions over thousands of years over certain ideas. We have schools of thought that fought with each other, and one said this and the other said this, and it never was resolved. It was resolved for whoever believed whichever way, but when you look at those contentions from a neutral person, I'm neither from that school nor for that, I was like, okay, both of you are somewhere wrong, even though you think that you're perfect and you think you're perfect, and you fought for hundreds of years. And Baha'u'llah just goes ahead and it's like, I was like, whoa. And it's so simple, and so simply corrected. Amazes the heck out of me.
It does beg a question, though. What is Baha'u'llah's point in doing this? You know, this long paragraph about the spheres and the line and the dusty earth and all of that. What's he doing? You know, what does he mean to tell us? You know, as Ghazali suggests, is he resolving a sort of disagreement about what the true theory of creation is? Is he proposing alternative cosmology? Are we supposed to plummet to depths for some insights about the physical world? Is that what he has in mind? Or does he have other purposes in mind? There is on one extreme of interpretation, there is I can't even paraphrase this properly, but in Rumi's Masnavi, the great poem in the Persian mystical tradition, Rumi says something like the father says goo goo gaga to the baby, you know, even though his wisdom encompasses the universe. So there's a sense that and even Baha'u'llah talks about how what he says is proportionate to the understanding of his interlocutors, of the people who was asking him questions. And the reply is in part constrained by the question. In part it's not, because he's a prophet and he's getting more truths across. But in part, the reply is going to be a function of the question. And if people are asking him crazy stuff, like, you know, when he was in the mountains of Kurdistan, living as a hermit, and somehow got the reputation of being an alchemist, and all these people trying to change copper into gold were asking him, well, what's the secret? You know, and Baha'u'llah replied with these tablets saying, well, here's how to do it. You know, what was he doing? You know, was he actually telling them how to change copper into gold, or was he speaking in a language that they would understand? So they say, oh, this guy knows the secret. You know, what else does he know? You know, was he trying to sort of open them up to larger truths? And Baha'u'llah says that more or less explicitly about the seven valleys. Later on, in Akka, someone asked him about the seven valleys, and he said, and this is from a tablet that's been published, but it's being translated and published with the new soon. In authorized translation, Baha'u'llah said, this tablet was revealed. He's referring to the seven valleys. He said, this tablet, the treatise on wayfaring, he says, was revealed to a member of the Sunni persuasion in accordance with their thoughts and ideas. But whoever accepts this most great revelation has traversed all seven valleys that were mentioned therein. And so why would he have originally revealed the seven valleys if one doesn't need it to get to that endpoint that's described in the seven valleys? And I think the answer is implicitly in that tablet, that certain people who ask him have certain needs, and the truth has to be given to them through the lens that they can understand.
It almost seems like every once in a while he kind of winks, and instead of saying, "Oh, I know so many things I can't tell you," he just sort of peeks, gives you a peek at one,
Yes.
and then watches your mind explode.
Yes.
Goes on.
That's kind of,
Well, he says that in Davegan, that what has been said so far sufficeth. However, I'm going to go ahead and cite few more ways.
Yeah.
People thirst for different things.
I'm not sure if this is clarifying. Is this saying that the universe, the creation and the emanation of the universe is outside of time? We were talking about the eternal in the past, the eternal in the future.
Yes.
So the creation has always existed before and after, but there is a sustaining and emanating of the universe.
Yes. That one I'm going to defer because we're going to hit that head on in the middle of the second tablet of Manjusad, because that's one of the questions is about the universe, and Baha'u'llah answers this, and just to give you a foretaste of it, he affirms both the scriptural account, which is that the universe came into being at a moment, and the account of what he says the philosophers, which is that the universe is eternal in time. He says these are both true, depending on your point of view. So even when it comes to things that you think are scientifically verifiable, potentially, statements about the physical universe, Baha'u'llah says, well, depending on how you look at it, it could be this and it can be that. And that principle of depending how you look at it, which is an aspect of the principle of relativity of religious truth, goes deep down to sort of the foundational level, as we'll see again in the second tablet. Without becoming relativism, and it's very easily misunderstood, I think, this principle of the relativity of truth, that, oh, well, it's all relative, whatever your perspective, that's fine. And that's never what Baha'u'llah says. And that's not what physics says either. I think what Baha'u'llah is saying is not far, is the, let's say, spiritual equivalent of the principle of relativity that is known also in physics, that how you measure space and time is relative to your velocity and acceleration, which isn't to say that any measurement of space and time is equally as good as any other measurement. There's an overarching structure of things within which only a subset of possibilities is actually possible. So relativity is not the same as relativism.
So there is an absolute truth, but our knowledge of it is relative. Because you and I only know part of it.
Right.
No, I'm also thinking the grand scheme of things that it's all an illusion. The world, isn't it? The world that exists is basically an illusion. And nothing really exists except the energy. So, if you think about everybody has this piece of plastic in their hand, and with the movement of our fingers, we can have access to the whole worldwide information, and something even 50 years ago we would have said, oh, this is baloney, no, it's not possible.
Yeah.
So every little child has it in their hand, and so there's something in there, but so easily we can move it around by a force of kon, to be, the intention.
Mm-hmm.
My intention being, I know what's happening, I can see the pictures across the world, and I don't have anything fancy, just a regular phone. You know, so it's the intention and the intention that brought the technology and the intention to access that.
About this illusory nature of the world, Baha'u'llah says in the meaning, the world is but a show, vain and empty, a mere nothing,
Right.
bearing the semblance of reality. Set not your affections upon it. Verily, I say, the world is like the vapor in a desert, which the thirsty dreameth to be water, and striveth after it with all his might, until when he cometh unto it, he findeth it to be mere illusion. But, which isn't to say it's pointless, though. Yeah, there's a point to it.
There's
And the point, again, has to do with consciousness. The point ultimately has to do with realizing the physical, structure of the world, and all of that it's the finger pointing at the moon, to use the phrase from the the Sufis, or is it the Zen, the Zen Buddhists? I can't remember the origin of it, but it's a signifier. It's in itself, it has no sort of fundamental significance, but it is signifying something which does. And we're meant to see the moon, but everyone is focusing on the finger and not realizing that the finger is pointing at the moon. So they're not getting it. Okay, so coming back to paragraph 2. We're never going to finish. It is clear and evident, therefore, that the first bestower of God is the Word, and its discoverer and recipient is the power of understanding. This Word is the foremost instructor in the school of existence, and the revealer of Him who is the Almighty. All that is seen is visible only through the light of its wisdom. All that is manifest is but a token of its knowledge. All names are but its name, and the beginning and end of all matters must needs depend upon it. Thy letter hath reached this captive of the world in this prison. It brought joy, strengthened the ties of friendship, and renewed the memory of bygone days. Praise be to the Lord of creation, who granted us the favor of meeting in the Arabian land, Iraq, wherein we visited and held converse. It is our hope that our encounter may never be forgotten, nor effaced from the heart by the passage of time, but rather that out of the seeds thus sown, the sweet herbs of friendship may spring forth and remain forever fresh and verdant for all to behold. And among those seeds that Baha'u'llah is sowing, I think the greatest is what comes in this next paragraph, 1.4. As to thy question concerning the heavenly scriptures, the all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present-day afflictions can never be the same as that which its subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. So this, I think, is really the key paragraph. If I were to pull any paragraph, out of this volume, sort of take with me on the desert island, this kind of would be it. And I think, as Baha'u'llah himself alludes to in the next tablet multiple times, this was really his answer to all of the questions. So we'll spend a bit of time unpacking this paragraph, because it, as we'll see, represents a profound departure in humanity's historical conception of religion. How has humanity conceived of religion in the past? It's been conceived, and what I'll say is largely colored by the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. It's conceived as something which ultimately is fixed, which is top-down, that is, it's revealed from on high into the mouth of a prophet through various means, whispered into their ear, or revealed, chiseled in stone. The idea of Moses carving the Ten Commandments in stone and bringing them down from Mount Sinai is the sort of the image of that I think neatly encapsulates a certain approach to divine revelation which pervades the entire Judeo-Christian Islamic conception of the nature of the prophet and of the nature of revelation. The prophet received the revelation on the mountaintop, it's chiseled in stone, and it's brought down to the people. And what Baha'u'llah is proposing in this paragraph is turning that notion of revelation upside down. It's no longer something that is revealed from on high in a fundamentally arbitrary manner to which we must conform ourselves because it's from God. You know? In other words, by the force of authority it's given, and by the sheer force of authority we follow. Baha'u'llah is offering here a radically different picture of what the prophet is. Instead of and I should hasten to say that by offering this radically different picture, Baha'u'llah is not negating the earlier pictures. He's not saying, well, it was wrong, and now we can't even think of it in this way. Baha'u'llah is offering the dark side of the moon. You know, we've only ever seen, you know, one side of the moon, you know, on Earth, and it wasn't until the 1960s that we flew spacecraft to the dark side of the moon and got pictures of it and saw what was there. And I think Baha'u'llah is doing the same thing. We've only seen, at least in the Judeo-Christian Islamic, it's sort of in the West. We've thought about God through a certain lens. We've thought about revelation and religion through a certain lens. And Baha'u'llah is not saying that lens is wrong, or that we should just drop it and forget about it and completely change, you know. But he's adding to it a three-dimensionality. He's saying, look, it's a diamond with multiple facets, and let me show you another facet. And another facet of this diamond, another way of looking at the divine, is through this imagery of the divine physician. So what is it about a divine physician that's so fundamentally different than the idea of a prophet who's received a message and is simply transmitting a message? Well, it's the difference between the top-down and the bottom-up. It's the difference between something which is static and something which is organic and dynamic and evolutionary and adaptive. And this is what Baha'u'llah is giving us the idea of. The idea of religion which is fundamentally adaptive in its nature. What's it adapting to? It's adapting to the exigencies of the day. The prophet, or rather the physician, or the prophet in his role as physician, has an understanding of how the body works. The physician, when they prescribe the cure, doesn't do it by consulting an oracle. They do it by consulting the sick body. Mm-hmm. And from their understanding of how bodies work, how they're prone to certain disequilibriums, and how those disequilibriums can be cured, it's through their knowledge and understanding of the body that they prescribe the cure. Mm-hmm. So it's a different, this is how it's a bottom-up kind of conception rather than a top-down kind of conception. And it's also, I think, very much in line with how Abdu'l-Baha defines the knowledge of the prophet in Some Answered Questions. And this is in chapter 40 of Some Answered Questions. Let me give you one quotation among several in this very pivotal passage, in this very pivotal chapter of Some Answered Questions. This is in, okay, this is the old, sorry, this is an old compilation, so this is quoted from the old version of Some Answered Questions and not the new translation. But the idea is the same. So Abdu'l-Baha here is not using he's not explicitly referencing this idea of divine physician, but the idea of understanding sort of the connections is essential to this. He says, since the sanctified realities, the supreme manifestations of God, and I should say this is on pages 157 to 159 of the old translation. Since the sanctified realities, the supreme manifestations of God, surround the essence and qualities of the creatures, transcend and contain existing realities and understand all things, therefore their knowledge is divine knowledge. and not acquired. That is to say, it is a holy bounty, it is a divine revelation. Briefly, the supreme manifestations of God are aware of the reality of the mysteries of being. Therefore, they establish laws which are suitable and adapted to the state of the world of man. For religion is the essential connection which proceeds from the realities of things. Religion, and in a later paragraph in that same chapter, he reiterates, he says, religion then is the necessary connection which emanates from the realities of things. And as the supreme manifestation of God is aware of the mysteries of beings, therefore they understand this essential connection, and by this knowledge establish the law of God. So Abdu'l-Baha is describing religion and describing the sort of the mystery of the prophethood in this very, I think, organic and bottom-up terms. It's not that it was just given to them out of the blue, and that they're just telling us what they were given. It's they have, and how they get it is the mystery. You know, how are they born with this innate awareness of how it all works? You know, how are they born with this preternatural ability to intuit what the reality of the human world is? Let's just bracket that. We don't have an answer to that, but we also don't have an answer to how did Mozart, compose his first concerto at the age of 6 or whatever the age was, and how did the great autistic savants are born with this amazing ability to compute numbers or to memorize infinite numbers of facts. And the human mind, just without even referring to religion or revelation or the supernatural, there are aspects of human potentiality which are still not well understood, and which are seen in the greatest sort of scientists, philosophers, musicians, artists, and so forth. So we see in the world, not the religious sphere, we see examples of people somehow being born with amazing abilities. And we might consider the prophet among that category of people born with certain amazing abilities. It's just their amazing abilities have to do with understanding the nature of human relationships and the ultimate depth psychologists, which is not, I think, to try to demote them from the unique station that they occupy, but it's to try to see connections between the physical and spiritual worlds, because as Abdu'l-Baha tells us in the Tablet of the Universe, these two are so joined and connected, that it's really relative whether you see and identify something as being spiritual or physical. There's actually a Tablet of Abdu'l-Baha where he says, that to the vegetable, the spirit, the animal is the spiritual reality, which is, in one sentence, I think, does a lot towards giving us a different way of understanding what in the past has been a metaphysically dualistic way of understanding the universe, is dividing the spiritual stuff and material stuff, and then you have to figure out, well, how do the two connect, and how do they relate to each other, and what is that spiritual stuff anyway, which no one ever has really seen. Abdu'l-Baha says, well, spiritual reality can be seen in these relative terms as well. If you're the vegetable, the animal is the spirit. Okay, well then if we're the human, what is spirit is just that next level up. The next level of consciousness is what we call spirit and spiritual reality. But it's all one. There's only one existence. There aren't multiple worlds of existence that are interacting. There's a single world. There's a single realm of existence. And physical and spiritual are all part of that single realm. So going back then to this sort of infinitely deep paragraph 4, Baha'u'llah is giving us a new way of understanding the nature of the manifestation as fundamentally as a divine physician. A physician is administering a remedy. And not only does that upend this sort of bottom-down way of thinking about revelation, but also it gives us several more keys two practical and useful keys. One of them is it also gives us a way to understand the oneness of religion. Rather than just saying, just declaring that they're all one understands from this metaphor how the role of the physician is always the same, even though the remedy is different. So there's this sort of, you can intuitively understand the oneness of religion from this metaphor as well.
Actually, the same metaphor describes the changes in religion as well.
And that's the third thing I want to mention. So you're reading my mind. So the third thing you unpack from this is progressive revelation. That because the nature of the remedy of the divine physician changes depending on the illness. Well, that explains why religion from age to age is different. And if society is advancing, then that also explains how religion advances. Now that advance may not be linear. We may sort of look back in history and say, well, it looks like it's this march of progress, and that things are always going forward and never going backward. But even Abdu'l-Baha in an unpublished tablet mentions that progressive revelation is not necessarily linear. That a subsequent revelation is not necessarily superior in every respect to the revelation that came before. And he gives the example of Christianity. And he says Christianity was a revelation of a particularly high degree. He says, and that degree of spirituality was not seen again until the Baha'i revelation. So,
Who said that?
Abdu'l-Baha said that.
So Islam was the skip?
He doesn't call it out, but that's the implication.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it kind of feels that.
Yeah. So that's from an unpublished translation, where he makes that point about nonlinearity of progressive revelation. So this paragraph then is really a watershed moment, I think, and we're going to be able to come back to it several times, because Baha'u'llah uses this paragraph as the answer to a number of the questions, as he begins to address them one by one in the second tablet.
Can I unpack one more little thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says, we're talking about progressive revelation, every age has its own problem, but it also says every soul's particular aspiration. It's like the divine physician is prescribing for every soul.
Yes.
It's a very particular aspiration.
Yes.
Not
thank
just
you.
the world, but
Yeah,
each and every...
thanks for bringing that up, because it shows, I think, how to introduce a concept of there's a verticality and there's a horizontal, and there's a vertical axis and there's a horizontal axis to this principle of relativity of religious truth. And the vertical axis is that humanity as a whole is sort of moving in a particular direction. And again, not necessarily in a linear way, but organically. And organic things are messy. And sometimes, a tree grows, is always growing, but, some seasons where there was a dry season, or a hurricane came and stripped a branch away. And so, the tree, there are setbacks, but then there's ultimately a sort of a directionality to it. And that explains one aspect of this principle of the relativity of religious truth, from one revelation to the next. But the principle of the relativity of religious truth also has a horizontal aspect to it. And the horizontality is within a given revelation, there are different viewpoints. There are different ways of looking at the divine. And all of which are true within their own perspective. Not every single perspective being true, but there are various spiritual perspectives which all are relatively true. And Baha'u'llah describes many of these in his mystical works, the Seven Valleys, the Four Valleys, Gems of Divine Mysteries, and a number of other tablets that haven't yet been published. He talks about this sort of relativity of spiritual perspective at the individual level. And so we can think of this principle of relativity of religious truth really as having these sort of two different axes to it. So, moving on to the next paragraph, Baha'u'llah introduces the idea of the divine physician in this paragraph 1.4. in paragraph 1.5 and 1.6, he finishes the analogy.
And all three of those are translated by the Guardian in Gleanings.
Thank you, yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So the Guardian did not translate the entirety of this topic to Monty Sahib, but he did translate these 3 paragraphs.
All my favorite paragraphs out of these have been translated.
Yes, the
The
best
Mighty
stuff.
Falcon one is my favorite out of this one.
Yeah, yeah. Really the best stuff from this volume was already translated by the Guardian in Gleanings, and it was just put in the full context.
I just want to say also, in the new version of Some Answered Questions, it's the same, it has chapter 40. It talks
It's also chapter 40,
about
yes.
what you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Daniel's help, I just looked it up.
Yeah, yeah. The chapter numbers haven't changed in the new translation, but yeah.
Well, aren't some of them are it's rearranged, isn't it? The
Are there-
subjects. But anyway, that's
No, the chapter sequence has been retained, but the chapter titles may have been retranslated.
Oh,
And so, in looking at the new translation and comparing to the old, you might not immediately sort of, it might appear to you that things have been rearranged, but the ordering was maintained. And the reason for that is that the original ordering was approved by Abdu'l-Baha. It was, that's a whole side conversation.
Yeah, no,
How
yeah.
does semantic questions get
Good to
assembled?
know.
Interesting story in its own right. Okay, so in paragraph 1.4 here, Baha'u'llah introduces the idea of the divine physician. Then in paragraph 1.5, he says there are lots of false physicians. And in paragraph 1.6, he says, and I am the true physician. So that's the sort of the sequence, 4, 5, and 6. He says, we can well perceive how the whole human race is encompassed with incalculable afflictions. We see it languishing on its bed of sickness, sore-tried and disillusioned. They that are intoxicated by self-conceit have interposed themselves between it and the divine and infallible physician. Witness how they have entangled all men, themselves included, in the mesh of their devices. They can neither discover the cause of the disease, nor have they any knowledge of the remedy. They have conceived the straight to be crooked, and have imagined their friend an enemy. Incline your ears to the sweet melody of this prisoner. Arise and lift up your voices, that happily they that are fast asleep may be awakened. Say, O ye who are as dead, the hand of divine bounty proffereth unto you the water of life. Hasten and drink your fill. Whoso hath been reborn in this day shall never die. Whoso remaineth dead shall never live. So that's kind of the end, and then he sort of changes the subject and goes on to, brings up some other things, but that's like the heart of it. That's the real.
So he's calling the side like he's dead.
Huh?
So he's calling the person.
Oh,
No.
is he telling him that he's dead?
Uh,
Not necessarily. I mean, certainly not in so many words. I don't think that's what he's doing.
There's a bit of warning there, though.
Certainly a warning. Yeah.
Stephen, in
Yeah.
15 minutes you have break.
Okay.
And I'll leave it to you, but sometimes when Baha'u'llah changes themes totally, even though we have a schedule, I sometimes try to take a break early and then try a new theme rather than start and then have to break early. But I'll leave it up to you however you want to do it.
Yeah.
10:45 we have a break otherwise.
Okay. All right. There's a few more points and maybe then another paragraph or something. Because I hope that I hope to be able to get through the entirety of the second tablet, and if we don't make enough progress, we're not going to get there. One more thing I wanted to say though about paragraph 1.4 is, and maybe a fourth sort of point, I think that is quite relevant to how Baha'u'llah is redefining religion, is that added to and implicit in this redefinition of religion is the concept of social action. That is, if religion is ultimately a response to a certain set of needs, it's meant to address the exigencies of the day. Then it also redefines religion as something which is, by its very nature, has a social function. It's not completely detached from the physical world only for the sake of our individual spiritual advancement, for example. And in connection with that, one can think philosophically that there are three different ways of responding to the fact of our being in the world, the problem of our being in the world, the fact that we're suffering, and the idea that this suffering is in some way a feature of the human condition. And both philosophers and prophets over the ages have had effectively three different strategies to address this fact of human suffering. The first strategy is to endure it. Prime example of that is the Stoics, the Stoics of the ancient Roman Empire. You know, the religion of ancient Rome was Stoicism, and this isn't the place to introduce it really, but just to, in a nutshell, to try to say, Stoicism is an approach to our being in the world, which sees fate as being a very strong component of human experience. We are fated to experience our suffering, to be born into a certain condition, to have certain things happen to us, and we are not in control of that fate. We have no power over it, and so the philosophically austere and correct way of addressing that fate, which we've been handed, is to absorb it, accept it, and when you do, then you'll find that life goes the way you want, because the way you want is now aligned with fate. That's one way of describing the Stoic attitude. So it's a way of enduring the unendurable, and it's a way of accepting what comes, in a certain spirit of tolerance and equanimity. That's sort of position one. Position two is to transcend the world. So it's not about enduring it, it's about getting out of it. It's about, and one can give as the paradigmatic example, let's say Christianity itself. You know, the idea that this world is just evil. And the best thing we can do, the highest thing we can do is move on to the next world. So there's a sort of irredeemable quality to our physical existence. It's the world of sin. It's the world of of evil, and our sort of highest calling is to proceed out of this world to the next world. And the third approach to human suffering, the third sort of strategy that's been deployed over the centuries, is to change it. So you see the world, you see the suffering, and you want to change it. So let's change the world so that there isn't that suffering. Which of these three do the Baha'i writings? Which of these three categories do the Baha'i
I
writings
vote
fall
for
into?
number 3.
I vote for number 3, although you can see elements of 1 and 2.
Yeah.
It's kind of, there's elements of, accept the will of God, submission to the will of God. I mean, that's also quite central to Islam. You can see elements of the second one about the idea of the afterlife, and the next world is going to be better, so don't worry about the sufferings of this world. But my vote is for the third, in the sense that I think the Baha'i faith, more than other faith traditions, and more than most philosophies, with the possible exception of Marxism, which is really kind of a religion, that also says, here's the state of the world with the state of the dictatorship of the money classes, and here's how the proletariat is going to rise up, and so forth. And has a very religious view of history that we're going to change the world. It's a very revolutionary philosophy. There are other, and in that sense, it's sort of Marxism has a sort of overtones of a religion. But the Baha'i faith also, I think, quite explicitly says, yes, there is darkness in the world, and it's our mission precisely to eradicate it. And I think part of that is because, as Abdu'l-Baha says regarding the next world, he says that world is within this world. When asked about Malakut, the kingdom of God, he said that world is within this world. One experiences that world, the next world, within this world. This idea of this radical separation, that there's this lower world and it's a 2-story building, and we just leave this floor and we go upstairs, and then that's sort of it, and we don't have to worry about this lower floor anymore. That's not the way the Baha'i writings conceive of the relationship between the material and the spiritual. He says, in one place, he says that that spiritual world is within this world in the same sense that that a plant, sitting on the table, is in this world. These aren't living plants, but if they were, they would be great examples. And here we are walking around them, in their environment, enjoying them in a way. They're beautifying our environment, but they have no knowledge of us. It's sort of like we're the plants.
Don't tell them, they don't know they're plastic either.
They don't know they're plastic. So like it's almost as though we're here embedded within the matrix of that higher realm of consciousness and simply unaware of it.
Just like the baby in the mother's womb.
Just like the baby, exactly like the baby in the mother's womb. Yeah.
My understanding is the difference we have between, say, us and Marxism and such is that in the Marxist, socialist approach is to force these changes by basically forcing people to do right and forcing them not to do wrong. Well, our understanding of how we're supposed to, especially it's pretty clear in the Advent several places, where the transformation of society comes through individuals transforming themselves sufficiently to where their, for example, their community can then be, if a sufficient number of individuals within a community change, then that community becomes transformed as well. When that community is transformed, then it has the power to transform the entire country or the entire world. So it's actually at the individual level of transforming ourselves rather than forcing other people to be good.
Yeah.
Or preaching to them or waving little pieces.
That's one of many
pieces of
fundamental differences, of course, between the Baha'i faith and Marxism. Another being Marxism is explicitly materialistic, and it doesn't appeal to our spiritual natures in any way as a source of motivation or as a way of transforming individual human behavior, which is, I think, ultimately why it fails.
But they rely on the passing of laws and enforcing those laws to actually try to transform society, which is a great way to accumulate a lot of laws, but doesn't actually achieve their goals.
Yeah.
Would that, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, would that be an example of like a top-down kind of approach as opposed to the bottom-up? Like everything's kind of dictated to you, as opposed to taking each individual separately and raising them up.
Yeah, I too would give you the third partially, because I really don't see the writings urging us to that the society will change by physical actions, even though physical actions are needed to alleviate pain. But the first and foremost change needs to be here, transformative, spiritual, individual. And as soon as that transformation occurs, for his beauty's sake, as he says, we do want to act up. It's automatic, I believe. I've seen it being automatic, that when that heart wants to transform itself for his word and falls in love with him, you want to help every living or non-living, he says everything is living, right? You want to transform every living thing that is in front of you. And I believe that way Baha'i faith is asking for us to transform. And I think, as Abdul Baha says, that the same thing existed in the shape of a seed, even though it doesn't look elaborate. I believe when Christ said, I will teach you to fish men, I will make you the fisher of men, that's what he was going after. It's like, that's what Baha'u'llah wants us. It's all my studies of my own faith and all the others actually, to me, point me that he's concerned about me. Every book I read, it seems like Baha'u'llah was concerned about nobody in the world, just me. Every word he wrote was just me. And that's whoever is reading that word, right? That because I was like, how did you know I had these problems? Right? I mean, every single problem I had, he sat there and he took care of it. And that's how I see that wording in there, that every soul has its own aspirations.
Yeah.
And he speaks to every soul, and I believe that social change comes as a secondary effect of personal, individual, inner transformation. And
The idea of social change is also connected to the quote by the Bob, which we talked about yesterday, that the keys to happiness, and one of the keys to happiness being bringing those around us, everything around us, to its highest degree of fulfillment. That implies also some degree of transformation. But to your other point, I'll just leave as an open question. Is our salvation individual or collective? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So sometimes when me and my mom read the hidden words, it says like "oh people" or like it's addressing someone.
Yeah.
And so my mom would like have me, instead of saying "oh people," write like "oh Erfan," my name there. So I understood that's that addressing me, not like
Yeah.
some person in Slovakia or
Yeah.
Russia or something.
Right. That's great.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Piggybacking off what she said. So.
Yeah. Great point.
I often say that, for example, we're reading Kitab Igan together, and I'm like, don't think that this was then or this was that. This is a living word of God. We read the Bible or the Old Testament or the Quran or whatever we're doing. The scripture of God is living. It's called itself living. Living means it's relative to me today, and it's speaking to me, to every one of us, to every individual. And then we don't fall into that hole of, oh, he's just condemning those people. I mean, I need to look if I have those faults in me.